All right then. So now we successfully authenticated. Now there is no way that we have the user data in our database, right? So let me get into the clerk dashboard, and you can see we have the authenticated user information in the clerk, not inside our localhost project. So what we have to do is we need to access this user data and we need to store it in our own database. But the problem is how we can access this user data from the clerk. So for that, we need to have a API webhook which is provided by the clerk itself. Through that API webhook, we need to trigger that hook whenever the user is created or edited or deleted. We can access that hook, and through that hook we can use the Prisma to store the data into our own database. So before jumping into all those options and everything, first, I need to install pnpm. Let me clear it. Pnpm add at Prisma slash client, and we need to install the Prisma. So these are the two packages that I need to download in order to work with Prisma. Edit, and you need to install one more extensions which is called Prisma, because in order to work with Prisma you need to install this Prisma extension, because that gives you that keywords highlighting and IntelliSense options and everything, right? So go ahead and install that extension. And now we added those packages, and now I need to initialize the Prisma. So pnpm Prisma init. So that is going to initialize a new folder in your project. I think still it's loading something, fetching latest updates for the sub command. Okay, let's wait. It's downloading the latest versions and everything, and there we go. And like here I can see a new project folder over here called Prisma, and inside that we have a schema.prisma. This is the place where we are going to have ourselves the what is it, that the configurations for your Prisma and everything. And if you check it out, the environment variable, that's the place it is configuring the database URL, since it's giving the dummy database URL, and in this case we need to configure with our own database URL. For that particular stuff, I'm going to use this neon.tech. If you simply search for neon.tech, this is the database that we are going to use where we can access the Postgres SQL. So please search for neon.tech, and there you have to create yourself a new project, and you can create yourself the databases and everything. So in this case, all I have to use any existing databases, or you can, I think I don't need this. So let me delete that one. Wait a minute. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself a new project over here, and I'm going to name this project as the quiz app next.js, something like that. And I'm not going to change anything else. I'm just going to leave the rest of the stuff exactly as it is, and I'm just going to create it. And now over here, click the connect to your database, click this option, and you need to choose what kind of connector that you're going to use. We are trying to use the Prisma in our Next.js application, right? This is the database providers. Don't change that. And this is the environment variable for your database URL. Copy that. And I'm going to get into the env file, and I'm going to delete this complete database URL, and I'm going to paste it exactly as it is. Close it. Now we don't need to make any other changes. Just close this stuff. Simply like that. All right, so now we have successfully configured our connectors, and now all I have to do is to create the model for our user. So I'm just going to create that model user. So let's say model user, and here, since we are using the Postgres, so I'm just going to keep the ID as the integer, because ID will be needs to automatically generated. So let's say at ID at default, and I'm going to use this auto increment function provided by the clerk for Postgres SQL. Sorry, for the provided by the Prisma for the Postgres SQL. So ID, then we need to save the clerk ID, and that is going to be the string. And please make sure that needs to be the unique. So I'm adding the unique parameter for the clerk ID, because that is the ID that I'm going to use for accessing and storing. Okay, so that needs to be unique. Then I need to say the first name, which needs to be string. Then I need to say the last name, that is also needs to be string. Then I need the full name, that needs to be the string. Then I need the email, that needs to be the string, and it should be the unique one. Then I need to access the image URL, and that needs to be a string. Then whether that particular user is approved user or still the user is pending in order to create the quiz or create the learning systems or something like that. So I need to say is approved, which is going to be the boolean. By default, every user needs to be in the pending state until the super admin approves that user. So that's the default value is false. Then I'm going to use the created at date and time. So basically it will automatically going to insert the current system date and time when the user is successfully saved into our database. Then I'm going to use this updated at field, and I'm going to use this updated at attribute, because that is going to automatically patch this particular value every time whenever you make some updates for that particular data. So you don't need to make any changes manually to update this particular field in your API. This will be automatically updated by the Prisma and by using this database itself. Right? This is the user model that we are going to create. And now I need to push these changes into our database. In order to do that, I'm just going to say pnpm Prisma db push. Hit the enter. So that is going to try to connect your database and push this user table into your database. Let's wait. All right then. So now the entire model, which is currently in sync with our database, and I need to generate the client version. So Prisma generate. So this is going to generate the client version where I can access this user. So hit the enter, clear it, right? And I'm just going to reload this window. Okay, so now it is reloaded, and now if I click the tables over here, and there I should able to see a new table called users. There we go, users. So now we have the user table in our database. Now what we need to do is I need to connect this clerk project with our localhost project. So for that reason, I'm going to use this npm unton package. So basically we're going to create a tunnel for our local host, which gives us a public domain, something like that. Then using that public domain, I'm going to configure the domain in this project setup where we are going to create that API webhook. So using that hook through the local host, I can trigger that API so that I can save this user details. Later, once I deploy this project, I'm going to get the current deployed project domain, and then I will update that API hook so that every time whenever user creates an account through that deployed URL, the API hook will be triggered and the user data will be saved into our database. Now, without, I'm going to show you. You guys can directly copy this command. You guys can copy this command and you can use it. But in this case, it's going to create a tunnel using Cloudflare. And since I'm using Mac and I'm going to use the package Cloudflare directly, so I'm just going to use a Cloudflare tunnel hyphen URL, and I'm going to give the localhost URL over here. So let me copy that and let me paste it over here. So when you're running this, you guys needs to make sure that your local host is up and running. pnpm dev. This local host needs to up and running. Then only it's going to give you a public Cloudflare tunnel for this local host. Hit the enter. So that is going to create a new tunnel, and it's requesting this particular, and this is my public URL now. Now if I copy this and if I run it in my browser, my local host will run on a public URL. Wait and see, this is our public local host which is running in a public domain. So I can use this public URL over here. Let me get into the configure section and let me scroll all the way to the bottom where you can access the webhooks. Click it. And there I'm going to create a new endpoint, paste it, and remove any unwanted spaces front and back. Then /API/ clerk slash webhook. These are the folders that we need to create in our project folder, right? And this is the API endpoint. Currently, it's going to trigger. And later, when I deploy that project, I'm going to get that deployed URL and I need to change this event over here, right? For the time being, I need this public domain, and please make sure this needs to continuously running. Then only you can get the user data from the clerk and you can put it into your database. So every time whenever the user it's been created or deleted or updated, I need to trigger this API endpoint, right? So I'm just going to create, then I need to test it, right? So before testing, let's get back over here and I need to create that folder, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that particular API folder inside this app folder. Inside the app, I'm going to create a new folder called API. Then I'm going to say new folder clerk. Then inside the clerk, I'm going to say the web hook. And please make sure these folder names matches these last three values: API that's we created, clerk, and the webhook, right? And inside this webhook, I'm going to create a new file called route.ts. For API route, this is the file name that you need to follow, just like the same way what we used to create for page.tsx for creating a page, right? So this is the file name that you need to follow. And inside that API route, right? Inside that API route, we need to have a function, a post request function. So let's say export const posts, which is equals to an asynchronous function, get the request, which is the type of the request itself, request, and it's an arrow function, open it. And inside this function, I'm going to use the try and catch. If there is any error is happening, what I'm going to do, I'm going to return next response, which is provided by the next server.json, open it, and I'm going to return an object which is going to be an error, internal server error, and this is the error that we are trying to return. Along with that, I'm going to append the error. Okay, and right after this object, I need to send the status. What exact that status is? The status needs to be an object. So status, which is going to be 500 error, an internal server error. So along with this error code, what I'm going to do is I need to send that, get the dynamic string literals, paste it, and here I need to send the error, what exact error is being returned in the catch statement, right? And inside this try block, this is the place I need to access that user data const. Let's access the data. Then I'm just going to say await request.json. All I have to say console.log webhook data. I'm going to do that. Then I'm just going to say return next.js response. I'm going to send that data outside along with the status as 200, because we need to access the data from that API, right? So that's the reason we are returning that data. So this is the API now we created. So let's keep our application running. And in this case, this is the API hook. It's been running. And let's trigger this API, whether it is working fine or not. So let's say user is being created. This is the sample data that we are sending, right? You can see we have the email address and we have the first name, image URL, last name. So these are the data provided by the clerk, and we need to access these data and we need to supply to our schema values, right? So let's send this example. There we go. See, it's saying succeeded. Well, every time whenever the new user is created over there, it is going to trigger that API webhook. And please make sure that you didn't stop this one, because through that public URL only we are triggering that API webhook. And you can see it's compiled that API webhook, and we have our data, which is, this is the place where we logged it, right? And even if I say inspect the elements, if I get in the console, the network, so every time when you authenticated, it is going to trigger that API webhook. So you can see that return data in the network area over here, right? So now we know that we are getting the data over here. right? So now what I need to do is I need to collect the data object. These are all the data objects that we are been getting from our clerk. So using that clerk data, using these clerk data, I need to store these data into our database. So I'm just going to say const user data, which is going to be an object. Let's break it down, and which is going to be the first name, last name, and all those things where it is schema. Please make sure all these names are exactly the same. So I'm just going to say first name, which is going to be data dot first name. So where that first name is, this is the one, first name. Then last name, which is going to be data dot last name. Then email address, which is going to be email, which is going to be data dot email address, which is an array. You can see email address is an array, in that the very first object is our, which is carrying on our email address. So that is what we are accessing over here. Then I need to access the full name, which is going to be full name, where which is going to be a string literal. Get the data first name and the last name, combine them, and then put it in the full name variable, right? Then I need to supply the image underscore URL, which is basically coming from where, from your image URL object itself, right? So I'm just going to say data dot image URL. All right, so along with this I need to store the clerk ID, which is, that's the most important one. So which is basically, it's going to be your data.id, which is powered by here, see this ID, right? So this is the user data. Now this data needs to be sent into our user model. So in order to access that user model, we need to create ourselves the database instance for our Prisma, right? To do that, if you search for Prisma, click here and click the docs, and if you search for uh, global for Prisma, simply search for global for Prisma, where it is. Let the get started. I think they updated their documentation. The thing is, now what we are trying to do is, basically we are trying to create an instance for our Prisma client to access our database. Because the problem is, if you directly creating the Prisma client every time whenever using triggering an API or something like that, it is going to create a multiple instances for your database. But I don't want to create a multiple database for a single user. Just every time whenever a user opens this website, it just need to create a single instance which is needs to be accessible globally. So in order to do that, under this library folder, I'm going to create myself a new file called db.ts. This is the schema. Okay, so db.ts. Inside this db.ts, what I'm going to say, import the Prisma client from at Prisma client, which is basically we are going to access this Prisma client method. Oh, okay, why it is not showing that suggestions at Prisma client, which is there any mistake? db.ts. I think there is no mistakes, but I don't know why the suggestion is not working. At Prisma slash client. Okay, it's declared never used. So const global for Prisma. So sometimes the auto suggestions will never work, so you just need to reload it manually. Okay, so reload it. I think the Cloudflare, it's changed its URL. No, it's still the same URL only. Okay, so const global for Prisma is equals to global as unknown, and then as I'm going to create an object which is basically, it's going to be the Prisma, which is going to be the type of the Prisma client itself. Okay. So basically, we are going to create a new variable called global Prisma, and this is the global object which is defaultly provided by the TypeScript. If and we don't know that type. If the global is doesn't know, then we're going to create a new instance called Prisma, which is basically the type of the Prisma client itself. So if the instance is already created, we can access this instance. If it doesn't create it, then it is going to create a new instance over here. Then I'm just going to say export const db, which is going to use the global for this dot Prisma. Okay, if the instance is existed, then use it. Otherwise, create it new Prisma client. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is this needs to be accessed if the process dot env dot node env, if it is not equals to production, which means if it is deployed, only if it is deployed, then it will be as assumed as a production. During the production, if it is not in the production, you need to access the global instance which is created by the production server, the place where you deployed it. If you are not running on the production environment, which means your local host environment, you need to use this global prisma.db. So basically this line instruct you that if you're not in the production environment, use this. Okay, if you are in the production environment, use the server database instance. That is what it's given over here. Still we are getting this error. Module at Prisma client has no exported member. Maybe I just need to install this Prisma client one more time. pnpm add Prisma client. And now that should resolve that issue. Yep. Still we are getting this error. Why we are getting this? I'm not sure why we are getting that error. Let me delete this one and let me import it manually. Okay, it is generated over here. Oh, the Prisma, they updated it. Okay, so that's fine. Let's check this out. Localhost is running. Cloudflare, it's also running. Still on the same URL. And let's make sure everything is working fine or not. Just by, let me get in the localhost. And let me sign out. And I have to delete this user from our users, because that is the same ID I'm going to use one more time. So delete. Now we don't have any users. If everything is working fine, and you can see the API hook it's triggered, it's showing 500 because we don't have that particular hook for deleting the user, because we just have the post request. So every time when a new user has been created, it was going to have that. So now let me sign up or sign in, whatever. Get into the Google, choose this account, choose that account, and click continue. Once the user is successfully created, and that needs to trigger the API, and see it's triggered that the API slash clerk slash webhook. It is triggered it, and oops, we haven't sent the data to our database. So this is the place where you need to send your data into your database, right? So in order to send that data, all you have to say const user response await access the database from our library dot user dot create, and then I need to send the data, which is basically your user data, right? This is the data I need to send. And if I don't have the user response or something, which means there is some issue when you're working on with that, in that situation I need to raise a throw a new error, which is showing with that error message needs to be user creation failed. So that it will be triggered over here, right? Then if everything is working fine, I need to send the response data, which is not going to be the data, which is your user, which is going to be an object, which is basically the message as user created. Along with this, I'm going to send the user ID, which you can access it from user response dot clerk ID. Save it. This is the message that they're sending back. Okay. Now I have to delete this user account one more time. That's pretty sad. I'm going to delete this user one more time. Now we don't have any user, and let me sign in one more time now. Create it by using Google. If I click continue, it is going to trigger that webhook. It's been triggered. And now if I check into our user database, if I refresh, it's taking slightly some delay. Yep, here we go. See, due to the free tier version, the data, the reflection, it's taking some time, but still we have our data over here. See, the user ID, my name, first name, last name, full email address, image, URL, is approved status as false because we haven't approved that user, right? These are all these things, but now, yep, I'm gonna manually approve this user for the time being because this is the ID I'm gonna use for super admin, right? You can use your own email address as a super admin and you can manually change the value into true. Later, every time whenever the user is being created, it is going to keep the status as a false, and if the status is false, he can't create that quiz or learning something like that, right? So this is all about the tunnel creation. We successfully have our user data into our database right now, and the next action is going to be create the landing page and create the dashboard page where the user can create the quiz and learning sections and everything. That is what we are going to do next.